This is what the election is like. I'm going to mute and let Jacob talk.
Well, I was there in spirit, by which I mean I was watching a live stream online, but we learned less than we wanted to from Joe Gloria's press conference. He said that there was a considerable amount of mail ballots that were dropped off on election day, but we don't actually know how many. That we're going to find out sometime later today. We do know that there was about 14,000-ish, 15,000-ish ballots dropped off on Monday and then collected by the USPS on Tuesday. That will be added to the count today, so some numbers in Clark County. And then we also know that the USPS picked up an additional 12,700 or so ballots today, Wednesday, and that they can keep picking up mail ballots up through Saturday. And so we expect the number to increase, but the sort of specifics that we were hoping for, we didn't really get.
What do we know from the other counties, if anything, at this point, expectation-wise, about seeing some additional numbers today?
Well, we know in Washoe County, 7,000 outstanding votes. We expect a lot of that is mail. We know that a lot of the drop-off mail ballots that Washoe County saw also, there was about 6,000 or so Republican to about 5,000 or so Democrat to another 6,000 or so nonpartisan. So which way those mail ballots are going to go, I think, is still unclear. And so, yeah, we're gonna have to wait until some of these results post to have a better idea of where things are going.
All right, so John Ralston, where is your head at now with expectations on when we may be able to start making some calls?
Well, I am quite disappointed in what I just saw, and Jacob very nicely distilled what Joe Gloria said, which is tell us everything but the number that we want to hear, which is how many ballots there are in those drop boxes. Now, I heard him say that there are 300 boxes of ballots. Jacob, you heard that as well, correct?
Yes, yeah, 300 boxes.
So we don't know how many ballots are in each box. But there clearly are a lot of ballots out there. Democrats obviously hope that it gets into six-figure range somewhere, especially Catherine Cortez Masto, who will need everything to break right for her. But Elizabeth, based on the timeline that Joe Gloria gave, I don't think we are going to have a final answer until next week. We may know a lot more by Saturday and may be able to call some of these races. For instance, and one of you on here can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm exhausted, but there are a couple of the constitutional office race where I believe the Democrat is trailing by 9,000 votes. And I believe that both of them, I think it's Treasurer Zach Conine and the Secretary of State candidate Cisco Aguilar, I think both of them are down by 9,000 votes. I think there are probably enough ballots out there, and if the margins favor Democrats, I think they will both probably come back. But I think it is certainly a no sure thing for Catherine Cortez Masto, and she may fall short. And I think it is very, very difficult, like an Everest type climb for Steve Sisolak to come back from a 40,000 vote deficit.
That's interesting, John. So of the races we can't definitively call, I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. You're telling me that Sisolak probably has the most to be concerned about among the Democrats?
Well, Sisolak is almost certainly going to lose unless they find a treasure trove of ballots greater than the estimates that are out there right now. The Attorney General, Aaron Ford, is almost certainly going to win. He has a very large ballot lead, and it's not the Democrats are not going to have a subtraction from their lead, except in the rurals where they will lose a few thousand votes because there are some ballots left in some of the larger rural counties. But overall, this Clark mail should help them. Now, is it going to help them 2-1? Maybe not, but it's going to help them in significant numbers.
Okay. Riley Snyder, anything you want to add? What are your thoughts this morning after the last 24 hours we just lived through?
I'm very tired, but I do have a question for John that might be helpful because I think there's a lot of chatter about like mail ballots remaining in Clark County and kind of like what it means. So John, when you're looking at the numbers, like what like rate do Democrats need to be winning kind of like the mail ballots that come in from this point onward for there to be good news for Democrats? Like what kind of rate do they need to like see to have a realistic chance to take a lead in some of these races?
Well, first of all, Riley, there is this blog on the Indy site called the Early Voting Blog, where there is some of the. I'm kidding. Half kidding. So listen, the reason that everybody is so at sea in terms of, and I mean Republicans and Democrats and people have been doing this for a long time, are at sea here, is because there's two factors here, right? And I always say this is about the math, but there's two mathematical numbers here that are important: the volume of the ballots, the number of the ballots, and the margin that the Democrats have. The smaller the number of ballots, the bigger margin that they have to have. I think there have to be at least 100,000 ballots out there for Catherine Cortez Masto to have a chance, Riley, and they have to, and the Democrats have to be winning those, if not close, if not 2-1, then close to 2-1. Remember too that Washoe County has announced that there are 57,000 mail ballots that have not yet been put into the count there. We know that 18,000 of them are relatively evenly split, and so that may end up being a wash or close to it. But what about the other 39,000? The mail ballots in Washoe County have been to the Democrats' advantage too. How much will that? How much? What clip will those come in on? To use the phrase that you used, and how many ballots are there really left in rural Nevada? We don't know the answer to that. We know based on a tweet put out by Colton over at the RJ that it seems like there are thousands, and the Democrats are going to get killed in that cohort. They're going to get killed. So they're going to lose probably 3,000 or 4,000 more votes on that score. I still think that means that Zach Conine and Cisco Aguilar will probably end up winning, but that's not good for Catherine Cortez Masto.
All right, I think we've got some viewer questions Joey has been monitoring. And for those of you who are watching, if you have questions, now is the time to drop them. We will take them in order, as many as we can, until we all fall asleep. So Joey, go ahead and give us that first question.
Yeah, someone was asking if question 3 was going to impact our First in the Nation primary, which, I think those are a little bit of separate issues, but I'm going to broaden that question out a little bit and just ask how the ballot questions have been doing in general.
I can take that. So no, question 3 won't affect presidential primaries. So in 2024, when we have all the candidates coming through here, there won't be like a ranked choice option. There is kind of that already, like just in how the party set that up, but that's a totally separate thing from question 3. Right now, all 3 ballot questions are winning. Question 3, the ranked choice up in primary 1, is the narrowest margin. The last I checked, I think it's like 30 to 40,000 votes in favor. And it's been sort of weird because it's like, I don't really know there's no like clear rural urban Democrat Republican dividing line because so many elected Democrats were against it. The state Republican Party was against it. So that's been an interesting one to watch, but it seems like that one's going to be pretty narrow. But the other 2 ballot questions, which is a state version of the Equal Rights Amendment and making the minimum wage $12 an hour, those both look like they're kind of on track to pass.
I just want to say out loud that my biggest surprise last night was question 3. Frankly, I was so caught up in looking at all the horse races, right, and all those numbers that I almost forgot about the ballot questions until we were well into the evening. And when I saw the numbers for question 3 to the positive, I was surprised because polling even a month ago was showing that it was going to be rough, and it didn't look like it was going to pass based on polling. So obviously the money that was spent on messaging in the past 30 days did its magic. And unless there's a slew of votes out there from people who hate question 3, it looks like it might indeed pass, which will make our next election pretty interesting, I think.
Another question from the chat here is 100,000 ballots a reasonably expected number based on election history in Clark?
Well, the problem is, as I've been saying all along, Joey, and as Joe Gloria actually said today at his press conference, it's an apple. I apologize. It's an apples and oranges comparison because the only other election where we had everyone get sent a ballot was the 2020 election, presidential election. So we just don't know. 15% of the vote came in after election day in 2020. Riley can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they had 7 days then, and then the legislature changed it to be 4 afterwards. So I think the reason that the 100,000 is being thrown around by both sides, by the way, is because if you look at what the turnout is in Clark County, I think it's, someone can correct me, I think it's around 600,000 ballots have been cast, and people think that it's going to get to 700. And even 700, by the way, in Clark County is pretty low, which is why some Democrats are optimistic it may be even more than that. Just so for perspective, Joey, if it's 700,000 altogether in Clark County, that's still just a little over 50% turnout, which is really low.
Yeah, and we're also getting questions about the security measures that are in place, with these mail-in ballots that are kind of outstanding right now. Do we know anything about that?
Well, I'm sure, I mean, if I remember correctly, and Jacob can maybe correct me if I misspeak at any point here, but if I remember correctly, there are pretty strict security protocols in place. Such that ballots from the time, from the ballot box, which is locked, to the voting center, and then sequestered in a secure area. And then and I'm not sure if a voting box is what we mean by a box of ballots. Does anyone know? Do we take the ballots out of the drop box and put them in another box, or is it just the one box and they stay in there until they're ready to be counted? Does anyone know that?
So, I was going to say, video producer Tim Leonard and I were out yesterday talking to voters at polling locations, and we also talked to a couple of the ballot couriers who go to the locations. They go halfway through the day, and then at the end of the day to pick up the ballots that are dropped off at the boxes in those locked boxes. And they have 4 people count to make sure that they all the couriers, there's one Democrat and one Republican, and so that they both count, and then the people at the precinct count. And then they take it and they have a Ziploc and they take it back to the registrar of voters to be counted as well. So I know there's a lot of security measures there.
Okay.
I think Riley had something to say too before I cut him off.
No, that's okay. I was just going to add that there is chain of custody for all this stuff. I think during the press conference, you heard Joe Gloria say that there were 2 police officers with all the mail ballots that were turned in last night overnight at the elections department. So it's certainly secure. I think in Washoe County, there's a live stream if you're really curious /bored and want to watch people count ballots. But that's another example of a transparency or measure that you can see that people aren't tampering with them.
Here's the problem, though, Elizabeth, and everybody on this Zoom knows this, and many people watching, is that it doesn't matter what the security protocols are. If someone who is leading right now gets overtaken by these mail ballots, there are going to be people, unfortunately, some of them will actually be on the ballot and lose their leads, who are going to cry fraud, who are going to make all kinds of allegations completely unsupported, but bolstered by an electorate that has been poisoned by these kinds of conspiracy theories. And so, that's, I don't know what the solution is. If you're going to mail everyone a ballot, ballots are going to come in late. And why shouldn't you be able to mail your ballot on election day? Why shouldn't you be able to drop your ballot off on election day? And so it's just the damage that has been done by the so-called leaders of one party to try to create uncertainty is really going to be damaging if some of these races flip, especially if one of them is key to control of the U.S. Senate. Just imagine.
Yeah, one of the suggestions I heard from a number of voters over the past few weeks, and John, I don't know if you're going to completely hate this idea or not, but I'm going to repeat it, is that because we do have a large swath of the electorate that has been persuaded that we have a voter integrity problem and we have a ballot security problem, it was suggested that rather than what John just said, which is that you should be able to mail your ballot on election day, the suggestion was you can mail your ballot, but it's got to be received by election day so it can be counted on election day. And in a way that would align with the way we do early voting. In other words, it would kind of skew mail ballots a little more towards an early vote scenario versus being held equivalent to votes that actually happen on election day. So I don't know if the legislature will be motivated to take this up in February. It may depend on who our next governor is.
It looks like we got some more. We got a lot of questions coming in, but I'm trying to parse them here. But someone asked, and they might have missed this earlier. We have new people coming in. But John, would you rather be Catherine Cortez Masto or Laxalt right now electorally?
I've been asked that once or twice today, Joey, and a friend of mine who's actually a Republican who voted for Catherine Cortez Masto thinks that he would rather be Laxalt because of the needle that she has to thread and because of the uncertainties that are out there. If we think that there are 100,000 plus ballots out there, though, I am not so sure that that's true. Listen, I just hope that the result is clear and decisive, and as much as it could be clear and decisive at this point, because I think anything else is going to be listen, I have a feeling, even though the Democrats are the ones who say, this crying of fraud is terrible, that I doubt they're going to go gently into this good night if Laxalt is still ahead by a little bit after this entire process.
Yeah, I am very interested to see what happens there on the Democratic side. Another, thing I just want to throw into the conversation here that I've been thinking about, and we'll be able to parse some of this once we see all of the final counts across the state. So this is something John can be thinking about for next week, is basically, it's about ticket splitters, whether we mean Democrats, Republicans, or nonpartisans, people who, for instance, may have voted for Catherine Cortez Masto for Senate, but may have voted for Lombardo for governor, and so on down the ticket. It's my suspicion that we probably had quite a bit of ticket splitting this year in Nevada, which makes things even more difficult to predict. But I think there might be a ray of hope for Catherine Cortez Masto if that is the case.
Joey, real quickly before we move on, if I could, I want to bring Jacob in. Since Jacob, have you been spun by the Democrats or the Republicans on where this Senate race is? And the question that Joey asked about who would you rather be, and that they both would probably say they'd rather be them. But are you getting spun at all?
No, I mean, that's what I've heard. Everyone would rather be where they are right now because the Democrats, from what I've heard, are looking at the turnout nationwide, and they see enthusiasm for Democrats in other states, and they say, why can't that happen here? Why can't we expect the number of mail ballots to actually be really high or whatever? Whereas Republicans are looking at Nevada, and they see those leads that Lombardo especially, but Laxalt also, have built over election day. They see strong election day turnout, and they say, well, why can't Nevada be the bulwark that keeps that flips the Senate, And so, yeah, I mean, that's really the consensus is I think that Republicans are annoyed, right? This is not the red wave that they predicted. I saw one strategist told me ahead of election day, we're not talking about whether or not this is going to be 2018. We're talking about whether or not this is going to be 2010 or 2014. That's how confident Republicans were coming into election day. That obviously hasn't come to pass. That said, I don't think they're feeling terrible, about their chances.
We've got some more questions. A lot of people are asking like, hey, what the heck, Nevada? Why are we so slow at counting? Florida counted all their about 7.5 million ballots on election night. What's going on with Nevada? So what's going on, Nevada?
It's you guys aren't tweeting at John. You need to tweet more questions at him, and that's going to up. So just hop on Twitter. No, it's all related to the system we set up for expanded mail balloting. So every active voter in Nevada gets a mail ballot unless they actively opt out, which only a few thousand did. So because ballots can be accepted so late, like we talked about earlier, up to Saturday, and then the signature curing process. This is a change from how we used to do things in the past, and it expands like the timeline of elections. And as more votes are not known on election night, it's just harder for us or for candidates to declare victory or like know who's going to win. That's not the case in Florida or in other states, but every state runs their elections a little bit differently. And in Nevada, it's just that was the decision made by Democrats in the legislature to push through the system to give people more of a chance to vote during COVID and just to move to mail voting. But the trade-off is that it just takes longer to call races and have a longer period of uncertainty.
Jacob, what did Joe Gloria say this morning? Because last night we were told that Clark County was trying to set our expectations. And they were saying last night that one of the reasons they couldn't get any farther in the count was that they were understaffed. And then this morning, and I was kind of trying to watch the tweets, from the press conference, but you were there actually listening to the whole thing. What did Joe Gloria say about staffing? Are they understaffed? Are they fully staffed? What is the case?
Well, he's defended the staffing, and he said, they brought in contractors and they've got the people to count the ballots, and I think the real unknown is how many ballots they have. He just described it as a considerable amount. We heard in Washoe County, they actively said it's not a staffing issue, it's a volume issue, but you can see how those two things might be related. And so I think it's unclear. He did defend the number of staffers they do have, but I don't know that it's clear right now how much there is to count, and I think that's really the X factor that would determine whether or not there are enough staff.
I also think he's reluctant to say that he doesn't have enough staff, because that would be a reflection on his bosses, right? Who are supposed to be giving him that staff. And so, listen, this. I don't even know what enough means. As Riley pointed out, we just started this all mail, and it was a presidential election in 2020, and they were completely overwhelmed. As I said, and this was from the AP. I think 15% of the election was counted after election. No, I don't think it's not going to be anywhere close to that. Well, maybe, I suppose it's possible, but I don't think it's going to be that much this time. But you can see why he would be very coy about answering that question when he gets paid that better. Although he is a lame duck, right? He's retiring, so he could have said something.
Reminder to the people watching that if you have questions, send them in the chat. We're getting lots of questions, so thank you for asking, but feel free to ask if you just joined. The next question I have is kind of related to that, but it is, counting ballots that are, or could ballots that are rejected or that need to be signature cured, could those make a difference right now?
There are about 9,000 ballots that need to be signature cured, and of those, Gloria said today that 5,000 hadn't been addressed. And that number we expect to get bigger. Obviously, as mail ballots come in, some of those are going to have signature issues, so that number is going to grow. People have until Monday to make that happen, and so I think the real question is, how narrow were the margins? Who would those ballots have helped? I think another question is, which way do provisional ballots go, right? If you show up on register to vote on election day, you're issued a provisional ballot. That doesn't get counted until the middle of next week. And so how does that impact things? There's a lot of open questions.
I think the interesting thing about the signature curing, and those numbers actually seemed, pretty high to me, right? They could make a difference if the race is close. And people should know that, this is a process whereby, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob, if there's a problem with your signature or any other kind of problem with your ballot, they actually take it out. They do not count that. These are not, it's not like they're going to be subtracted from the count. They're out there. I will tell you that the Culinary Union claims, and they've made a lot of boasts this time, they claim that they're running a signature curing program with their members to make sure that since they did this big get out the vote program that was mostly mail, that they're going to make sure all those ballots get cured. So that will certainly help the Democrats if they follow through on that. But I frankly don't remember what the numbers were. Maybe Riley or somebody else has already checked that from 2020, but thousands of ballots needing to be cured could make a difference in some of these races.
Yeah, I know we did write a story because I'm getting old and senile. I can't remember how many there were last time, but I remember being surprised even last time at how high the number was. But it did strike me as high when I heard it. And so, Jacob, I want to say to you, the next time you get a chance to ask, I'm really curious. Did Clark County tighten up? So we've talked about, and I'm desperately trying to remember the term, right? The signature checking machines can be calibrated to different sensitivities. And experts have, this has been tested for many, many cycles everywhere that ballots are tabulated, right? That the machines are taught and trained to be very, very accurate when checking a signature and processing it through and giving it that little green light that it's okay. I'm wondering did we change anything about the tabulation of the signatures from last cycle to this cycle based on what happened last time, where there were all these allegations that, which were never proven out, by the way, I want to be clear about that, but there were allegations that the signature machines had been calibrated to be looser. In other words, to let more through. Versus being tighter where they might flag more ballots. So I'd be curious to know if there were any changes made.
I can talk a little bit about that. I'm sorry, Jacob, if you were going to answer that question, you can go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I don't know the answer to that question, so go for it.
So this relates to the 2020 election when the Trump campaign sued Clark County. So just for some background, Clark County is the only county in the state that uses what's called an Agilis signature matching machine. What it does is look at the signature that's on your mail ballot and compare that to what they have on file. And what the Trump campaign said was that the dots per inch, so like the resolution of the signature, was too low and it would not capture like the right resolution or signature on the mail ballots. What Clark County said and what judges ultimately ruled in favor of was that the machines kind of capture like the low-hanging fruit as it relates to signatures, and any that like appear to have more of a difference are rejected by the machine and then reviewed manually by a team of election workers. So to my knowledge, that hasn't been changed. I don't think the dots per inch has changed from the last election cycle to this election cycle. So that is still the same. And to go all the way back to the question, I do have the 2020 signature cure pulled up because I thought this might be something that comes up. So in 2020, there were 12,584 ballots statewide that needed a signature cure. Of that, about 9,697 were signature cured and 2,800 were not signature cured. Those broke down like strongly in favor of Democrats, I would say. So out of the total, it was about 39% of the ballots that needed a signature cure were from Democrats, 22% from Republicans, and then 39% other. Of the ones that were successfully cured, it was like 43% Democrat, 19% Republican, and 38% other. So as the like one example, so again, don't draw too many conclusions from us having one past election where we did this kind of expanded mail voting, but the signature cure ballots do tend to lean a little bit more towards registered Democrats.
That's interesting. So if there were only 13,000, which in a way sounds high, but not so much when we talk about where we are now, right? And that was a big turnout year, much higher than we're going to see this cycle. So I would anticipate, gosh, we might even, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised now based on what Riley said, that if we get over 20,000 ballots that need to be possibly signature cured, and that definitely could swing a race.
I'm just wondering if Elizabeth's going to respond to Riley basically saying that she's a conspiracy theorist, like someone from the Trump campaign.
I asked the question on behalf of those who are concerned about such matters. And I actually think it's fascinating how these machines get calibrated. So thank you very much, Riley, for expertly answering those questions.
I've got a list of like 7 questions now from listeners. So thank you, or from watchers. So thank you so much for asking your questions. I'm going to move to this one next, which is just, is Washoe trending more red, which I think we already talked about, but just real quickly, John, if you wanted to retouch on that one.
I think so. Based on the results that we have now. Now, again, there's still 57,000, I believe is the number. It's amazing. I've forgotten the number from the beginning of this Zoom to now. That's how tired I am. But I believe it's 57,000 and 18,000 showed it being pretty even. And we'll see what the other 39 do. But Captain Cortez Masto's losing in Washoe, and most of the Democratic statewide candidates, I guess all of them are losing. If maybe Ford is not losing, but the rest are. And one of the things that Democrats have been most proud of, Joey, the last few cycles is being able to turn Washoe around in key statewide races. Jackie Rosen and Steve Sisolak, when they ran in 2018, won there. Joe Biden won there. Hillary Clinton won Washoe. But it sure looks like it's starting to turn. Now, it may turn back. It's a midterm turnout. It's not that high, although Washoe County turnout is much higher than Clark's now for right now because of those thousands or tens of thousands of ballots. But I would say the answer is maybe.
And I just got a message to remind viewers that ballot tracks will let you know if your ballot has been counted and if you need a signature cure or anything like that. And TRAX, ballot tracks. So, make sure to go do that if you're curious. The next question is, are we seeing a greater than average number of undervotes in nonpartisan races and ballot questions? That is a very specific question. I don't know if any of us have the answer to that, but if anyone does, probably John.
Well, I do tend to track this stuff afterwards, Joey, and believe me, we're not nearly at the afterwards part of this election yet, but it's always interesting to see the drop off down the ballot. And it's really pronounced in judicial races, but sometimes in the ballot questions as well. There was a ton of money spent on question 3, though, to Elizabeth's earlier point of how it turned around, and I think that's why the numbers changed so much. But I don't know the answer to that yet, Joey. It's too early.
Washoe County, sorry, Joey, does have undervotes. Again, it's early because not all the mail ballots are in, but for the ballot questions, it's like around a 3,000 undervote. So when people talk about undervotes, that's just a reference to like people who fill out a ballot but don't answer a certain question. So like usually senator, governor has very few, and then like justice of the peace for random judicial courts are very high. So 3,000 is like on the low side for ballot questions. I'm just scrolling through the Washoe results only. This is only for Washoe County. A lot of the judicial races are like, yeah, there's a 30,000 undervote for Reno Verde Justice of the Peace Department 3. So people like just didn't care about that race. So there's definitely a high interest and not a lot of undervoting going on, at least in Washoe County, which if that tracks statewide, which I would expect it would mean it's getting pretty close to overall turnout numbers.
If you're a viewer who skipped a judicial race, don't take Riley's comment personally that you didn't care. You may not have known what to do. And I think it's quite common among voters that if they don't know enough about either candidate or about a particular race, a lot of voters do skip a race. And I think it's just because they don't want to, it's better to make no decision than to make a bad decision. Maybe I think that's probably the psychology there for people who skip certain races. We're doing our best at the Indy to bring you judicial candidate evaluations each cycle. We didn't do as many this year as I would have liked. We're going to try to do more in Northern Nevada and statewide next year. And then maybe even for some of these other races, don't kill me for saying this, Riley, but like controller and some of the, assessor, county assessor, these kind of positions that just don't get covered that much by the media nor by the Nevada Independent right now, because we do have limited resources. But it is my hope that in future cycles, we can do more and more reporting on all of these other races so that voters actually can feel that they're informed enough to make a choice.
You need more reporters for that, Elizabeth?
I do, John. Thank you.
And if you want to see more reporters and more reporting on that, you can always donate to the Nevada Independent because we are a nonprofit and we work off of your donations. So thank you so much if you do choose to donate. But I wanted to ask, or I wanted to mention too, that I was kind of looking at some numbers last night, and Nevada is a fun state because we have a none of the above option instead of just not voting for people. If you listen to the Indy Matters podcast that Jacob and I host, you will hear a segment about that where we talk to the Secretary of State's office about choosing none of the above versus just not voting in that. But a couple of the judicial races actually in the state where there was only one candidate, it was like 25% got none of the above, especially in the rurals, which I just thought was a very interesting stat that kind of stood out to me. But anyway,
I want to say something about that, Joey, because I thought that was hilarious as well. I thought, like, how grouchy do you have to be? There's only one candidate on the ballot, and presumably if they've made it to the ballot for Nevada Supreme Court, they're probably a qualified candidate. Just really amuses me that so many disgruntled people still chose none.
Yes, choosing none of the above versus choosing not to vote, I think is kind of a funny thing. It really is like, pushing their buttons, telling them we really don't want you specifically to win. But yeah, like I said, the Indy Matters podcast has a whole segment where we talk to the Secretary of State's office on that, if you want to listen. But the next question here from viewers is, we were talking about 300 boxes left to count, and they were just curious, how many ballots are in a box? What is that? I mean, I have no idea. Does anyone know?
Well, it's a number that varies, right? Not all boxes are made equal, and they're in different areas of town. Who can say? All we know, it's a considerable amount.
Sure. Are we expecting to see more numbers from those boxes later today, or like what's our expected outcome as we move forward? Or do we not have any idea right now?
We know for sure in Clark County that we're going to get something like 15,000 additional votes today, but that is from drop boxes from Monday and mail pickup from Tuesday, not from election day drop off. So yes, kind of.
That's an important distinction, folks, that Jacob just made, right? Because generally the dropped and mailed ballots that are going to come in, like starting with whatever was voted on election day and after, does tend to favor the Democrats. Not so with those other two categories that Jacob just mentioned. And that's why this matters. And it's also why John still may not be able to make any calls later today based on that, because we are just not going to get a look at the mail, unfortunately, for at least another couple days.
So I think what Gloria said, Joey, if you just to tally it up, and Jacob could correct me if I'm wrong, there's about 30,000 ballots, maybe 35,000 if you include the provisionals that he mentioned. There's the 15,000, then there's 12,700 or something like that was picked up by the post office, and then there's the 5,000 provisional ballots. So we know that there are at least that many. A little more than 30,000 that still need to be counted. We don't know what the margins are going to be, and that my guess is that they're going to favor the Democrats. By how much, I don't know. And then we are going to get to the mysterious considerable number later today. Joe Gloria promised that he would tell us what that considerable number is, and the question you asked, Joey, is key. Like, if you could say that we knew that there were X number of ballots in every box, then we could multiply that times 300 and have an idea of how many there are. But as Jacob said, they're different sizes, and we just don't know.
So we've been talking a lot about the governor's race, the executive branch races, the Senate race between Catherine Cortez Masto and Laxalt, and the ballot questions. But what's going on with the state legislature? John, you predicted that it was going to stay blue, but what are we seeing with those state legislative races right now? State assembly and state senate.
I think Riley broke this down on Twitter. Riley, tell us what you found. I think he found the Republicans picked up a seat or two in the assembly, probably, and status quo in the Senate. Is that right?
Yeah, so if you're curious, just look me up on Twitter, and I did a whole long thread, and of course had one mistake. 8037 is not a hold, it's a flip. Thank you for everyone who flagged that for me. But right now there are 3 very close state Senate races and 5 very close state assembly races that are like still total toss-ups, and it'd be way too early to make a call on any of those just because of the number of mail ballots remaining. The big takeaway is that it is extremely likely Democrats will hold on to both. Republicans kind of have to run the table in the Senate to get a majority there. And I think even if they win all 5 of those extremely close races, there has to be something really funky going on with mail ballots for them to win a majority in the assembly. So those are kind of the big takeaways. Again, you can look at that thread if you're interested in specific races and like which ones are the very close ones. But I think if nothing changes, if the current results like stay in place and who's ahead continues to stay ahead, it will remain the same as it was. So yeah, a lot of work for the margins to stay the same in the legislature, but that could all change in the next couple of days.
And not only that, I want to tack onto this and just remind everyone that let's assume it does stay the same. Basically, both houses still controlled by the Democrats. If Steve Sisolak loses and Republican Joe Lombardo is our next governor, that changes the entire dynamic of the legislature because our governor does have veto power. So we will have a very different session, even though the houses didn't change, if the governorship changes. And I think that's why a lot of lawmakers and lobbyists are on pins and needles today.
So I've got a couple more questions here before we wrap up. The next one is, what's the Culinary Union's impact been on this election? I live in Reno. I've had culinary people coming to my door from Atlantic City. So it was, they were really big push this year. What were we seeing there?
Well, as I said, they've been boasting throughout the election cycle that they're going to do this big program, biggest program in history. And we knocked on 1 million doors, and, maybe 750,000 people slammed those doors, but that meant they'll still get 250,000 what they call voter contacts. I'm just joking, but the bottom line is that, as I said earlier, I think if Catherine Cortez Masto survives, the Culinary Union's going to have a lot to brag about. And I also believe that they had a hand in making sure that those 3 Democratic House seats remained in Democratic hands, which, by the way, nobody, including myself, thought was going to happen. 2 at least of those, Dina Titus and Susie Lee, were in real jeopardy, and polling showed that, and they were really worried, and they both ended up winning, barring something, as to borrow Riley's phrase, funky happens with the mail ballots. I think they're going to be fine. And so the Culinary can take some credit for that. And you will see you will see the credit being taken by a lot of different groups for the good things that happened, and the reverse for the bad. That's again par for the course in campaigns.
Yeah, and I think something to note too with the culinary is they were very specifically targeting economic messages. I think this entire cycle we've been talking about how Democrats have been weak on the economy, and the culinary specifically has been talking about stuff like Wall Street landlords. They talk about rent control. They talk about housing prices as a function of Republican policies and labor issues. And I think that's their way of sort of minimizing, like, yeah, gas is expensive. And the Secretary Treasurer, Ted Papageorge, told me this. Yeah, gas is expensive, but you know what's more expensive than gas? It's rent. And that's been their message. And I think that that's what they've been, Democrats at least, have been relying on in those sort of critical districts to sort of maybe people don't pay attention to the whole, don't look at inflation too much. Think about these other things. And that sort of helped mitigate the Republican message there.
I have a question from a staff member, actually, education reporter Rocio, who asked why me, John, and Jacob are all matching.
Coordinated Zoom.
Yes, this is unintentional. I was in a dirty t-shirt right before we started this one. Next question is, what are the total number of ballots cast? Do you have those numbers handy? And then they were curious what the mail-in versus in-person was looking like.
We just mean so far.
So far, yeah, I know total, like, that we have total. So if we have those numbers,
I'm sure we can look. I have not looked at the updated numbers today. Do you have anything off the top of your head, Riley or John? I know we're all tired.
I think wasn't it about 800 something thousand?
I want to say that. I think so. Yes, I think it was in between. Yes, I think that's about right. And John, you've been saying all along on your early blog that your early voting blog, right, that we might or might not get to 1 million. You didn't think we probably would. I think am I quoting you accurately?
At the beginning of the whole period, I was with most other analysts on both sides, thinking that it would probably going to be something like a 1.1 million turnout, and then as the numbers started coming in, I started going down to 1 million, and then as it really seemed to be low, I question whether we get to 1 million. Again, it's going to depend on these mail ballots and how they tally up, but I think it's going to be close to 1 million. That's my guess.
All right. Well, I guess to wrap it up here, how is Nevada compared nationally to the outcomes? What's going on? When looking at the state, zooming out, what are we looking at?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to analyze turnout numbers yet, which I do want to do in the days to come. But we actually, in many states, we have to wait for full turnout to be able to do that. I think what I found the most interesting in the story last night is that the vaunted red wave didn't happen. It happened here and there. So we can, I don't know what we need a new term, I guess, right? So sporadically, there were some Trump Republicans who did win. Vance in Ohio is the most obvious example of that last night, I think. But the Republicans did not sweep the way the Republicans thought and the Democrats feared they would. And this is really interesting. And you're going to be hearing a lot of punditry, I think, in the next couple of weeks about, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean that part of the Republican Party is turning from Trump? The moderates are taking back their little piece of the Republican pie. Is that what it means? Or, who knows, right? These are all the questions that'll be asked and answered in the weeks to come. But I think that's kind of the big story nationally that everyone's talking about, is that the red wave really didn't happen. It happened here and there for very specific reasons. That's why local and state journalists like us still have jobs, because it's our job to explain what happened to the national folks, what happened on a local and state level. Is there anything you want to add to that, John?
Well, everything you just said is true. And Joey, the interesting thing is that one of the reasons that Democrats are convinced that there are so many ballots outstanding in Clark County is that they say, what, are we going to be the only state in the nation that during a historic midterm turnout when the Democrats did so well, relatively speaking, that our Democrats didn't turn out, that there was a complete collapse of the Democratic machine. It doesn't make any sense intellectually, right? It's a midterm. It's not going to be huge turnout, but it couldn't have been like it. No, we have to wait for the final numbers to come in, of course, but if indeed Zach Conine and Cisco Aguilar come back and win, then it's going to be just sporadic. Lisa Kano Burkhead is probably going to lose for lieutenant governor, but that is an anomaly. She's an appointee who really, Sisolak helped her get through the primary and then said, see ya, basically good luck getting there, right? And so there's no red wave, Joey. That's the story. And Republicans, even here, when the turnout started looking low at the beginning of early voting, we're thinking, I wonder how many seats we can really take in the legislature. This is going to be fun. And it didn't turn out to be so much fun.
All right. Well, there's a lot more questions, but I think we're going to have to wrap it there. Unless, John, you want to tell us your predictions for the 2024 presidential election?
I predict Donald Trump won't run. How about that? Even though he's going to announce something next week, I predict he will not run.
Wow. Okay.
So my joke question.
Do we save these recordings, Joey? Because
no. These are not saved ever anywhere. Well, thank you everyone so much for watching. If we didn't get to your questions, feel free to tweet them at us. We might reply to you. We're all gonna go get some rest and some more coffee, and we'll have more election results for you as the numbers roll in. And again, remember, we are a nonprofit news organization. We rely on your donations to keep going. If you want to see more reporting for us, please go to our website. There's a big donate button on there. Feel free to click that if you feel like it. We really appreciate you watching and supporting us as we continue this fun adventure in the nonprofit journalism world of Nevada. So thank you so much for watching.